I've got Phil on the end. How you doing, Phil? All right, and then TIPATAT, okay, and JOERGEN right here, and Richard, okay? So Phil, why don't you start first? We're going to jump right in.
So,
Okay.
for bringing up my slide. That's interesting.
We're going to fix that.
All right, as they fix the slides, I'll give you a little background. I'm with the USC Entertainment Technology Center. That's good, that's fine, that's slide number 2. The Entertainment Technology Center was founded to bring the studios together. It's funded by the CTOs of the studios and consumer electronics companies to look at the future of entertainment, help bring in new, interesting, emerging technologies, and help everybody avoid format wars. So for the last 3 years, I've been focused on everything about VR and AR, the business, the art, and the technology. I'm just going to briefly talk about this subset of distribution at a very high academic level, and then TIPATAT is going to go into details in his deck. So let me just get started. Where do I point? I'm pushing the green button. That's backwards. That's it. All right. So the upload guys this morning talked about 2 levels of VR. I break VR into 4 levels. At the lowest level, you've got magic window. That's where you're holding up your cell phone and your tablet, and you're either waving across it or you're waving it around the room to get a view of the virtual world. Above that, as they mentioned, is the cell phone-based VR environment. Anything you slip a cell phone into. What's important to note is those 2 levels are where the mass market is. Consumers already own those devices, so that is where the potential for monetization, or at least for distribution, is really huge. You get up above that with the HMDs, the head-mounted displays. That's the Oculus Rift, the HTC Vive, everything that most of this conference is talking about. It's going to be niche for a long time, mainly because people just don't like being isolated for a long period of time. That includes anything that is a seated, standing, or walk-around experience with hand controllers or not. At the Oculus Connect 3 conference last week, Oculus talked about a new headset that will be untethered and will have computer powers inside of it. It's still not mobile. It's still that higher-end niche type of environment. And then above that, you have the group or location-based experience. That's the Void or zero latency over in Japan. Any environment where you're superimposing a virtual world onto a physical space. A lot of money, as many of you know, a lot of money is going into that because people are used to paying tickets to go to a location and have an experience. So those are my 4 levels of virtual reality. I need to talk about augmented reality because it's already here. So we have weak augmented reality, which is what Pokemon is, where you're using some device, could be your cell phone or your tablet, but it is essentially showing you augmented information, but it's floating. It's not tied to anything in the physical space that you're seeing. Strong AR is where you're placing virtual objects in the physical world and they appear to belong there. When you move around, they respond properly. If they're producing sound, the sound comes from the right position. Some people talk about medium AR, which is your talking textbooks, your storybooks that come to life. I'm going to put those in the strong AR simply because they sort of react to you as you move around. So we have VR and we have AR. Then you get into distribution, and I'm really not going to talk about the slide because TIPATAT's whole talk is on this for the most part, I believe. But there are many ways of getting this stuff out to the consumer, whether it's the main stores like the Facebook applications, or Verizon has a whole VR initiative from the telco standpoint, or there are startups out there that want to be aggregators of UGC. Many ways of getting it out. But a real issue I'm going to spend a couple of slides on is the lack of interoperability, because the lack of interoperability is going to slow consumer adoption. This was covered in the last talk a bit when they were talking about porting the Martian VR experience over to different platforms. Each one of those little ovals at the bottom is a different platform, which requires porting software, porting an experience over to it. It doesn't improve the experience, it costs the developer more, and it may or may not grow the market simply because if I am buying a headset, I want to be sure I buy the headset that all the games I want work on it. If after I buy it, somebody sells a game that doesn't work on my headset, I'm going to be ticked off. We need interoperability to get the mass market to say, I feel safe enough to buy this high-end experience. So a path to success in these early days is focus on what can be open and interoperable versus what must be unique to create competitive advantage. Each platform needs to have something unique about it to make you want to buy it. But we need some foundational interoperability so the whole industry can grow. And there was a recent survey that showed that 78% of developers are not planning platform-exclusive content anyway. So the industry is moving in this direction. We just hope it moves faster. One of our center's goals is to try and facilitate that. We're at the point where we're developing the technology and the experience at the same time. They inform each other. But the reason you need to be interoperable is because we're going to get a flood of new input and output devices coming down the path in the near future. There are already in production scent necklaces. Haptic feedback is being explored, although that's a $25,000 solution you're not going to see anytime soon. People are already marketing for $60 virtual reality food, which relies on scent and chewing plastic. Galvanic vestibular stimulation is about giving the sense that you're moving when you're not. The one I really like, which is totally odd, is lower right. In a study over in the UK, they put 17 subjects in heart monitors. They projected their heartbeat into an avatar 2 meters in front of them, and within 2 to 3 minutes, they felt like they were having an out-of-body experience. There are all sorts of things coming down that we don't know what are coming that will open up whole new areas. So we need to be ready to be hit by constant innovation. The culture is already ready for this type of experience because they're already carrying around this technology in their pockets. But consumers don't buy technologies. They buy the experiences that the technologies deliver. And so however this user experience is done, it must be in service to the content or the experience. And the success of the user experience will determine engagement, the amount of time they want to spend in it. Engagement will determine monetization and monetization opportunities. The more engaged they are, the more willing they might be to pay for things associated with it. And with that, I turn it over to TIPATAT. Cool. Right?
Okay.
Thank you, Phil, very much.
Yeah. Really great intro. Okay, so can we go into my deck? Do I need to press?
No, wait till you.
Okay. Well, hi everyone, I'm TIPATAT CHENNAVASIN. I'm general partner and co-founder of the Venture Reality Fund with my partner Marco. We are the largest independent VC firm that invests in early stage AR and VR startups. We've been professionally looking at VR for over 3 years now, but the fund is relatively new. Started earlier this year, we've done 14 investments so far, but we've talked to over 1,400 VR startups, all the platform guys. And what's really cool is VR is actually here. It's now. It's no longer something that we have to guess about. We can look at actual real data. So I want to share with you some of the data that we've been looking at as we see how content is being distributed in VR right now. So I'll just dive right in. So just time is short, so I'm just going to jump in. Virtual reality content, just in terms of content distribution, it's good to think about as 2 types. One is the applications, interactive experiences in games. You can think of these as executables. These are things that would be like an app, a video game, or even these kind of like real-time animation experiences. And then on the other side is the media, which is 360 video. And you can kind of think of this as a .mpeg or MP4 file, or even stills, right? But what's interesting about these are generally shareable on existing networks and platforms. And then the others, the interactive content, the applications, those are shared in the App Store. So I'll jump in a little bit deeper. For applications and interactive experiences, really you have app stores for the high-end VR, which is like the console, like the PlayStation, and then also for the PC, which is the Vive and the Oculus. And then mobile stores for mobile VR, which would be the Samsung Gear VR, Google Cardboard devices. So what's cool is we can actually see some data. Of course, not a lot of data. Oculus has not been sharing. They don't want to say how much. Steam and Vive haven't officially shared, but there's this great site called Steam Spy, which gives all of this data. It kind of does it like a Nielsen rating style, so it's like plus or minus 10, 15%, but at least it gives some data, whereas else we'd be blind. But what's interesting to see is, okay, well, we know, if we don't know the audience of the Oculus Store, we know at least there's 200 apps right now for high-end VR in the Oculus Store. There's another like 400 plus for the mobile side. On the Valve Steam Store, what we're seeing is, it supports the Vive, it supports the Rift. There's 129,000 Vive users reported in the Valve Steam Store. But there's 125 million total addressable in terms of like the PC audience, people that have a Vive account that hopefully can be converted to VR over time. And right now there's 600 applications. And some people will argue, oh, well, I don't know how realistic some of those applications are in terms of quality experience, but we'll jump into that in the next slide. There's also the newly released HTC Vive port. So HTC has created their own app store, and this is for especially regions where the Valve Steam Store can't exist, like in China and in certain parts of Asia. But it's also more friendly to non-gaming content because the Steam Store has been historically a game distribution platform. And again, it's a pretty small audience right now, small amount of apps, about 75, but growing rapidly. And then today is actually the launch of the PlayStation VR. And so there, of course, sure, you could buy the discs, but really digital distribution is more important. And that's all done through the PSN store that's been around for a while. And there's 40 million addressable PlayStation owners. We'll see how many convert to PSVR. Estimates are a couple, hopefully 1 to 5 million within the first year. And we know that's been sold out all across the stores. And it's the largest pre-order in console consumer electronic history. And right now, I think they said there'll be 50 apps by the end of the year. So right now, I think there's only like 10. And then there's also independent app stores too, like the Weaver Transport or WeAreVR. But honestly, this is very much like what we've seen in mobile. The app stores will be owned by the hardware platforms because that's really what makes the most sense. It's the most trusted source, and that's where they want their cut. But now, diving into the Steam Store data, this is just culling the first 5 months of data. What's interesting is people are often harping on the fact, VR isn't taking off as much because we haven't sold 1 million units yet. But no consumer electronics has ever sold 1 million in less than 6 months when it first started, especially if you trace back to computers and laptops. But what is interesting is the quality of these users. With only 130,000 Vives roughly, there's already over 21 million in revenue that's been generated. And what's really great about this is, in the keynote, the Uploads guys mentioned, there's 2 companies that have made over 1 million in VR. No, actually, there's at least 5 companies that have generated over $1 million in revenue. And it starts from anywhere from, a VC-funded large professional company like Servius, who created the great raw data game, but also independent developers that, one person created Audio Shield, and it's actually the top grossing Steam VR application right now. It has a 54% attach rate. And if you think that it's an evergreen title, and as VR grows, then that number is just going to expand exponentially. But what's also interesting is there's been 4 million apps that have been downloaded in the Steam VR store. And if you look at it, it's not gaming that dominates that list. I mean, the top 2 are, but if you look at the bottom 3, they've generated huge downloads. And what's really interesting is, super high attach rates. You're seeing like 80, 90% attach rates for the IKEA VR experience, or Realities, which is a virtual tourism application. So the audience for VR is definitely much more than games. And so I think what would be most relevant for you guys is, especially for Hollywood, is to think about branded experiences. Right now, a lot of VR experience, the way people present VR is actually showing people these immersive advertisement experiences. But now they can be also distributed over the App Store, and people with Vives can get them. And that was what the Star Wars Trials on Tatooine experience was. It's gotten 80,000 downloads, and it has a 62% attach rate. And you know that everyone that has a VR headset is getting their friends to try it, because everyone wants to be part of Star Wars. And Disney actually created their own app that distributes 360 videos and other light interactive experiences to promote their movies, and they have a 32% attach rate, which is really impressive. So now, switching gears, we're going to talk about app stores for the mobile. Oculus has said quite a few times now that have 1 million MAU, which means they've sold over 1 million headsets, but they have 1 million monthly active users coming in time and time again. They have over 400 apps. It's really, really promising. Cardboard has already said that they've shipped over 5 million Cardboard players. They've had 10 million downloads of their Google Cardboard app. They have over 1,000 Cardboard apps in the store, and in September alone, there's 13 million downloads. Apple iOS, it's harder to get those numbers, but we've seen like the Google Cardboard app has been downloaded 2.2 million times, and there's roughly about 6.6 million of VR apps been downloaded in September alone. Running out of time, so I'm not going to talk about what are the most popular, but they're general games and entertainment apps, all free to play, with some have IAP. I'll show this deck later. It'll be available on our site, thevrfund.com, so don't worry about taking all the pictures. But now, switching gears, I want to talk about 360 video media. That's probably more of what Hollywood's excited about. And really, there's 4 ways currently that this is distributed. The number one is the traditional online video distribution channels. That's like the YouTubes and the Facebooks. Then there's dedicated 360 video distribution channels. We'll talk about that in a little bit. White label apps where people will create their own app to show off a VR experience, which is often looked down upon by the big hardware app stores because they don't want their store to be cluttered with tons and tons of apps that only show one movie or one experience. And then relatively new, but gaining traction is web VR. The idea is that we can distribute without having to download an executable. You can stream it, and it'll feel much more like what we experience today on the web. So this is really interesting for you guys, hopefully. What we're seeing right now is YouTube. We know there's 1 billion users on YouTube. And of the most watched apps that we're seeing right now, I mean, Clash of Clans 360, done by the great team at PsyOps, have 45 million views. Now, granted, the majority of this is not in a headset, it's on a desktop, but they are views. People are engaging it, and they're finding even people on a desktop or on a mobile device are engaging with 360 video more than regular standard non-360 video. But you can see too, like caught on cam is some garbage, user-generated junk. But then the Dubai piece, the Avicii piece, and the Get Barreled in Tahiti piece are all sponsored content that are done by GoPro, Avicii, Samsung, all these great pieces, but are getting over 15 million, 17 million views. On the other side, Facebook is another, of course, huge distribution channel for video, 1.7 billion users. What's interesting there is we're seeing 20.7 million views for their top, which was like a tourism piece. But then all the other 4 below it are all branded pieces and branded experiences. And we see like ABC News, Game of Thrones, Deadpool, Star Wars, all these major major brands, Hollywood brands are getting 360 content in front of millions and millions of eyeballs already. So desktop plus mobile VR definitely means the largest engagement for audiences. Now, there's 360 video focused distribution channels. What's interesting about that is if you want to reach a targeted VR audience, the best way is going through these distribution channels. And this ensures there's a whole bunch of them, not just the ones that are listed here, but these are the top ones. Samsung has their own VR video store, Oculus has their own VR video store, but there's also aggregators like John, Little Star, and VRideo that accepts anyone's submissions, but it's available to get content on every single headset, if possible. And then, of course, you can make your own apps. So there's companies like Evo or InstaVR that help content creators. So if you have 360 video or images and you want to create an app like what Felix and Paul did or what the Smithsonian did, then you can work with these companies, bundle your media, and then distribute it in an app that would be available in the app stores. And then, of course, we talked a little about web VR and how that's going to make it much, much easier to distribute, where you don't have to download an app. You can just click a link and watch 360 video right away. Now, the other part, too, is out-of-home distribution. We talked a little bit about experiential marketing, but the other parts are the VR arcades, the VR theaters, and the VR theme parks. In China, they call this offline, which is weird to me. But what's especially interesting is in China, there's already 2,000 VR cafes already operating right now, collecting revenue, putting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people through VR. Xinhuang operates 100,000 net cafes, and they're quickly converting them all to VR as well. And then also on the VR theater side, a little more high-end experience, IMAX is going to open 6 VR theaters this year, and 1 in LA in 2 weeks. And then VR theme parks and these more kind of crazy experiences that Phil kind of mentioned, the Void Ghostbusters experience. It's been in Madame Tussauds in Times Square. It's kind of a pop-up experience, but they put 400 people through that location a day. It's really impressive. And then the one part I want to talk about real just quickly was, what is the future of VR content? We talked right now, there's 2 types. But there's going to be more built native for VR. Other people have been talking a little bit about this next generation media. So instead of 360 video, which is a flat sphere or like a stereo sphere, what if you could actually have depth, look around the room, be a part of it? That's a volumetric capture, which 8i, I think, is showing off a piece at the stage 4. And then light field capture, which Lytro, Otoy, and others are pioneering. But then there's this other type of content, too. I would call it like user-generated content. I think Minecraft is a great example, right? In the standard traditional world, people create films and shows in Minecraft, and there's a company called Visionary VR that created this project called Mind Show, and it's an animation program that you can actually create animated stories by using VR as a creation tool. So it's not about watching in VR, it's about building in VR and then sharing with other people, whether it's in VR or flat for YouTube. But thinking about that, that's going to upend a lot of what VR media will be in the future. Okay, that's it for me.
Great, thank you very much. All right, thank you. That's really great data, I appreciate it. Now we're going to hear from JOERGEN. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hey, I'm JOERGEN GEERDS. I'm the CEO of Concept VR. We are a production studio on the east side, specifically in New York. We've been creating content before headsets existed. We really jumped into this new VR thing when it only existed in the Magic Window. No, Magic Window didn't even exist back then. It was only flat screen and you had to pan around with your mouse. But we already knew that this medium is going to come up because we've seen it coming up from the Full Dome experience, which is the VR theater that is now touted as something new, but it's actually kind of oldish in this context. And just taking viewers really into the immersiveness of things. And our main thrust here is in cinematic VR, which is not the one where you can walk around, but really taking the story that we want to tell as filmmakers, storytellers, writers, and producers, and really take the user into like, yes, please join us, let us take you on the journey, and you will have an amazing experience.
Great, great. Richard, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Richard BROO. I'm the founder CEO at WEMERSIVE. We specialize in building player technology and have building branded apps, anything from standalone apps to entire platforms for third-party companies. We live more in the background where we work with major ad agencies, film studios, brands directly to really do activations or help deliver really great content, such as companies like KONCEPT VR, who we work together with as well. We started building apps as a team back in 2010 while at an agency in Amsterdam, and we thought it was really great. So in 2012, we spun out to create our own company, and since have really been just focusing on trying to deliver really great interactive experiences with 360 video, but really also trying to push the envelope of which direction we can go and try to create more interactiveness, and you know, we're researching and trying to build the next level solutions where we can combine the 360 video, the 3D environments, and really allow people to navigate those.
Mm-hmm. So there were some great things we heard in the presentations about some of the trends and whatnot. And one of the things that I found very interesting was talking about working with brands, right, in terms of offsetting stuff. Obviously, some of the higher rated content we've seen has been tied to brands. Yep. Do you often see that the agencies are forward thinking in this, or do you guys have the experience of where the brands themselves? I know it's interesting and about this space is that very often people come from gaming. They're not traditional Hollywood people, they're from gaming, right? I know Pepsi, for instance, has a gentleman by the name of Brad Jakeman who used to be the head of Activision, right? So he's bringing that sensibility into the space, and a lot of the innovations at Pepsi are because of that. So do you find more innovation with the brands themselves or with the agencies?
I'd actually say from the agency side, because they really focus on having these really extreme creative teams, whereas a lot of brands, depending on the size of the brand, may only have a couple marketing people in-house. So they really rely on the agencies to create these concepts. For us, really getting the early days of 360 video onto mobile, it was really the ad agencies that drove that.